truth, we know very little about the childhood of Alysanne Targaryen, but one look at history makes the reason for this very clear. She was the fifth-born child of King Aenys and Queen Alyssa, a girl observers at court found her of less interest than her older siblings, who stood much higher in the line of succession. Most expected her to perhaps be married off to Jaehaerys, or some lord for a potential political match. But from what little has come down to us, Alysanne was always seen as bright, but an unremarkable girl, small but not sickly, courteous, with a sweet smile and a pleasing voice. To the relief of her parents, she never displayed any of the timid nature that had afflicted her elder sister, Rhaena, as a child. Neither did she exhibit the willful and stubborn temperament of Rhaena's daughters, Arya and Rhaella. Like all princesses, Alysanne would of course have her servants and companions from an early age. As an infant, certainly she would have had a wet nurse. Like most noble women, Queen Alyssa was not like to breastfeed her own children. Later, a maester would have taught her to read and write and do sums, and a Septa would have instructed her in piety and the mysteries of the faith. Girls of common birth would have served her as maids, washed her clothes and emptied her chamber pot, and in time she would certainly have taken ladies of like age and noble blood as companions, to ride and play and sew with. Alysanne did not choose these companions for herself. They were selected for her by her mother, and they came and went with some frequency to ensure the princess did not grow too fond of any of them. Her sister Rhaena was known for showering an unseemly amount of affection and attention on a succession of favourites, some of whom were considered less than suitable, and had been the source of much whispering at court, and the queen did not want Alysanne to be the subject of similar rumours. All this shifted when King Aenys died on Dragonstone, and Maegor the Cruel crossed the narrow sea to claim the Iron Throne. The new king bore little affection and even less trust of his brother's children, and he had his mother, the Dowager Queen Visenya, to see that his commands were carried out. Queen Alyssa's household knights and servants were sent away, along with the attendants and companions of her children, and Jaehaerys and Alysanne in particular were placed under the guardianship of their formidable great aunt, Visenya, hostages in all but name. They passed their uncle's entire reign being moved between Driftmark, Dragonstone and King's Landing at others' pleasure, until Visenya's death in 44 AC presented Queen Alyssa with an opportunity to flee, which she grasped quickly, escaping Dragonstone with Jaehaerys, Alysanne, and the famed Valyrian steel sword, Dark Sister. No trustworthy records of Princess Alysanne's life following their escape remain. In fact, much of what happened to the king and queen during this time is lost. Alysanne vanishes from the chronicles of the realm until the final days of Maegor's brutal reign, when her mother and Lord Rogar Baratheon marched from Storm's End at the head of an army, while Alysanne, Jaehaerys and Rhaena descended upon King's Landing with their dragons. Princess Alysanne surely had handmaids and companions in the days after Maegor's death, though regrettably their names and histories have not survived. What we know is none accompanied the princess when she and Jaehaerys took flight from the Red Keep on their dragons, save for the 7 knights of the Kingsguard, the castle garrison, and the necessary cooks, stable hands and other servants. The king and his bride arrived on Dragonstone with no attendants. Such arrangements were scarcely fitting for a princess, much less a queen. Alysanne required a proper household, and with that Alyssa perceived an opportunity to weaken and perhaps unravel her daughter's marriage. The Queen Regent determined to send to Dragonstone a thoughtfully chosen retinue of companions and servants to attend the young queen. The Grand Maester Benefit tells us this scheme was Alyssa's own. It was one that Lord Rogar Baratheon readily embraced, recognizing at once how it might be turned to serve his own designs. The elderly Septon Oswyck, who had joined Jaehaerys and Alysanne in marriage, remained to tend the sept on Dragonstone. Yet a young woman of royal blood required a female guide for her religious teachings. Alyssa therefore sent 3, the stern Septa Ysabel, along with 2 highborn novices of Alysanne's own age, Lyra and Edith. To oversee the maids and serving girls of the Queen's household, she appointed Lady Lucinda Tully, the wife to the Lord of Riverrun, famed throughout Westeros for her unyielding piety and devotion. Accompanying her was her younger sister, Ella of House Broom, a gentle maid once briefly considered a prospective bride for Jaehaerys. The daughters of Lord Celtigar, so lightly dismissed by the hand of the king as chinless, flat-chested and foolish, were added to the company as well. We may as well have some use of them, Lord Rogar is said to have remarked to their father, completing the retinue with 3 other noble highborn girls, one drawn from each of the Vale, Stormlands and the Reach, Jaehaerys of House Templeton, Coryanne of House Wylde, and Rosamund of House Ball. Queen Alyssa surely wished her daughter to be surrounded by fitting companions of similar age and rank, yet that was not her only purpose in dispatching these ladies to Dragonstone. Septa Ysabel, the novices Edith and Lyra, and the devout Lady Lucinda, with her sister, bore an additional responsibility. The Queen Regent hoped that these adherently faithful women might persuade Alysanne, and perhaps even Jaehaerys, that their union between brother and sister was a grave sin in the eyes of the faith. The children, as Alyssa stubbornly continued to call the king and queen, were not wicked, merely young and headstrong. With proper guidance they might yet recognise their mistake and renounce their marriage before it sunders the realm. So she prayed. Lord Rogar's intentions were of a less lofty sort. Lacking full trust in the castle garrison and the knights of the Kingsguard, the hand required informants upon Dragonstone. Every word and deed of Jaehaerys and Alysanne was to be conveyed back to him, as he impressed upon Lady Lucinda and the rest. Most of all, he was eager to know if and when the king and queen meant to consummate their marriage. That, he insisted, must not be allowed to occur. And perhaps there was more beside. Regrettably, we must now turn our attention to a certain unsavoury volume that began circulating throughout Westeros 40 years after the events recounted today. Even now, hundreds of years later, copies of this book are said to pass discreetly from hand to hand in seedier quarters of Westeros, turning up in particular brothels whose patrons pose the ability to read, and in private libraries of men with questionable virtues, where such works are best kept secure and out of sight of maidens, wives, children, and the devout. The notorious book has appeared under a number of titles: Sins of the Flesh, The High and the Low, A Wanton Tale, The Wickedness of Men. Each version bears the same subtitle, A Caution for Young Girls. It claims to recount the confession of a high-born maid who yielded her innocence to a groom within her father's castle, bore a bastard child, and therefore descended into every imaginable depravity across a long life marked by vice, misery, and servitude. If this author's account is to be believed, though much of it tests the bounds of plausibility, she's thought to have had an extraordinary succession of roles over the course of her long life. She claimed to have served as a queen's handmaid, been the lover of a young knight, followed armies as a camp follower in the disputed lands of Essos, worked as a serving girl in Myr, performed as a mummer in Tyrosh, and became the toy of a corsair queen in the Basilisk Isles. From there she was sold into slavery in Old Volantis, where she was tattooed, pierced, and adorned with rings, later attending a Cartheni warlock as his handmaid, and at last rising to become the mistress of a pleasure house in Lys, before, in the end, returning to Old Town and the faith of the Seven. There, so the tale asserts, she concluded her days as a Septa of the Starry Sept, committing the story of her life to parchment as a warning to other young maidens, that they might not stray as she once had. The lurid particulars of the writer's exploits need not be discussed here. Our concern lies only with the earliest portion of her disputable narrative, the tales of her girlhood, for the supposed author of A Caution of Young Girls is said to be none other than Lady Coryanne Wylde, one of the young ladies dispatched to Dragonstone as a companion to Queen Alysanne. Whether her account of that time is truthful we cannot say, nor even whether she truly penned the scandalous volume attributed to her. Some contend with reason that the work bears the marks of multiple authors, as its styles shift markedly from one story to the next. Yet Lady Coryanne's early years are particularly corroborated by the records of the maesters who served at Rainhouse in her youth. He notes that at 13, Lord Wylde's youngest daughter was seduced and deprived of her maidenhead by a churlish stable lad. In A Caution for Young Girls, his youth is portrayed as comely and near on her own age. In the Maester's Chronicle, however, it offers a far less flattering description, naming him a pox-marked fellow of 30, notable for little beyond his physique, likened indelicately to that of a stallion. Whatever the facts may have been, This surly lad was gelded and dispatched to the wall once his offences came to light, while Lady Coryanne was kept in her chambers to bear her bastard son. The child was removed not long after the birth and sent to Storm's End, there to be fostered by the castle steward and his childless wife. The Maester's journals record the boy's birth as 48 AC. Thereafter Lady Coryanne was closely supervised, though few beyond the reign house were aware of her disgrace. When a raven arrived commanding her presence at King's Landing, her mother begged her, in no uncertain terms, to never speak of the child or her transgressions. In the Red Keep, they will take you for a maiden. Yet, as she journeyed towards the city under the escort of her father and brother, they broke their travels for a night at an inn along the south bank of the Blackwater Rush, near the ferry crossing. It was there that a certain powerful lord awaited her coming. Here the story becomes knotted even further, for the identity of this lord who awaited her at the inn is debated, even by those inclined to grant a caution of young girls contains some kernels of truth. Across the years and centuries, as the volume was copied and recopied, many alterations and embellishments found their way into the text. The Maesters of the Citadel are painstakingly trained to reproduce a manuscript exactly as written, yet most common scribes lack the discipline. Septon copyists and holy sisters illuminating works for the faith frequently excise or amend passages they may deem offensive, indecent, or unsound in doctrine. As nearly all of A Caution of Young Girls might be judged indecent, it was unlikely to have been preserved by maesters or faithful septons alike, given the many copies known to have circulated. Hundreds maybe, though countless others were consigned to the flames by King Baelor the Blessed. The task of reproduction likely fell less scrupulous hands. Septons cast out of the faith for drink, theft, or lust, vowed acolytes who departed the citadel without earning a chain, hired scribes from the free cities, or mummers, worst of all. Such men, unbound by maester's rigour, seldom resist the temptation to improve upon the works transcribed, and mummers in particular are notorious for such liberties. In the case of A Caution for Young Girls, these so-called improvements mostly involved adding additional episodes of vice and altering the ones that existed to make them still more shocking and indecent. Over the years, with one alteration followed another, it became increasingly difficult to determine the original text. So much so, even the Maesters of the Citadel cannot agree on the book's proper title. The identity of the man who supposedly met Coryanne Wylde at the inn by the ferry, assuming this meeting actually occurred, is likewise heavily disputed. In the version titled Sins of the Flesh, and The High and the Low, typically older and shorter, the man is named as Sir Boris Baratheon, eldest of Lord Rogar's 4 brothers. In A Wanton Tale and the Wickedest of Men, however, the visitor is said to have been Lord Rogar Baratheon himself. All versions concur on what followed. After sending Lady Coryanne's father and brother away, the Lord commanded her to undress, so he could examine her. He ran his hands over every part of me, she recorded, and bade me to turn his way, and that I bend and stretch, so he may gaze upon me, until, at last, he pronounced himself satisfied. Only after this did the man disclose the true purpose of the summoning of her to King's Landing. She was to be sent to Dragonstone, ostensibly as a maid and companion to the Queen, but in reality she was expected to employ her charms and her body to seduce the young king. The man allegedly instructed her. Jaehaerys is likely more than a man-maid, infatuated with his sister, but Alysanne is still a child, and you are a woman any man would desire. Once his grace experiences your charms, he may see sense and abandon his foolish marriage. He may even choose to keep you afterwards. Who can say? Marriage is out of the question, of course, but you would have jewels, servants, anything you desire. There are great rewards in being the king's bedwarmer. Should Alysanne discover you together, all the better. She is proud and would quickly forsake an unfaithful spouse. And if you were to conceive, again, both you and the child would be well provided for, and your parents would receive a handsome reward for your service to the crown. Can we give this story any weight? So far removed from the events it recounts, with all the principal figures long dead, certainty is impossible. Outside of the girl's own testimony, there is no source to confirm this meeting at the ferry ever occurred. Even if a Baratheon did meet privately with Coryanne Wylde before she reached King's Landing, we cannot know what words were spoken. He might just easily have instructed her in her duties as a spy and informant, as the other girls had been trained. Archmaester Cray, writing at the Citadel in the final years of the reign of King Jaehaerys, considered the Ferry Inn tale as crude, comely, and meant to tarnish Lord Rogar's reputation, going so far as to blame Sir Boris Baratheon, who later quarrelled bitterly with his brother. Other scholars, including Maester Ryben, the Citadel's foremost authority on banned, forbidden and fraudulent and obscene texts, dismissed the story as little more than a bawdy tale designed to excite the lusts of young boys, bastards and whores, and those who partake in their favour. Ryben observes, "Among the small folk there are always men of this disposition who delight in tales of great lords and noble knights despoiling maidens, for it convinces them that their betters share their own base desires. May perhaps yet there are certain things we do know beyond doubt that may allow us to draw our own conclusions today. We do know that the young daughter of Maegor Wylde, Lord of Rainhouse, was deflowered at an early age and gave birth to a bastard. We can reasonably assume that Lord Rogar knew of her shame. Not only was he Lord Morgan's liege lord, but the bastard was placed in his own household. We know that Coryanne Wylde was amongst the maids who was sent to Dragonstone as a companion for Queen Alysanne. A singularly curious choice. If a lady-in-waiting was all she was meant to be, for scores of other girls of noble birth and suitable age were also available. Girls whose maidenheads were intact and whose virtues were beyond reproach. So why her? Many have asked in the years since. Did she have some special gift? Some particular charm? If so, no one remarked on it at the time. Could Lord Rogar or Queen Alyssa have been indebted to her lord father or mother for some past favour or kindness? We have no record of it. No plausible explanation for the selection of Coryanne Wylde has ever been offered, save for the simple, ugly answer preferred by a caution of young girls. She was sent to Dragonstone not for Alysanne, but for Jaehaerys.